I was actually running through the Greenburn Valley outside Grasmere in the Lake District, running at night with my head torch on in the hills. And I was out there, and I think, again, I quite like music on when I'm sort of running. I know you're a bit different to that sort of thing. I like to sort of be more in tune with your own body. But in the hills, I'm out there in nature, just sort of, again, finding my feet little bits. Again, quite quick reactions in the dark. Sort of completely, to myself, a completely clear sky of stars as well. No light pollution at all in that valley. Just me in this valley as well at night time. And all of a sudden, a family of deer came alongside me, and were just literally running alongside me in this valley for a good sort of 5 to 10 minutes. Just completely like we were just in tune with each other. No sort of sense of threat for both myself or for them. The sort of journey I was going through at the time, this complete redemption journey I was going through, and really so open to change on all fronts and support, that a moment like that just felt as if it was certainly something that was perhaps much greater than myself.
Harrison, how are we?
I'm very well, sir. How are you?
Good. I'm good, and I'm having a far less exciting week than you are, I think I would say, as this is week one of, what are you going to call it, self-employment? Are we going to full-time Fell Foodie? How do you want to phrase it?
I guess all of those work. Yeah, exactly. It's first week of freelance life, I guess, in that sort of aspect, and seeing where we can take it and where we can go forward.
So for a bit of context on what that freelance life entails, are you happy just giving us a bit of an overview of how you would describe yourself, how would you describe your proposition online, and what direction are you going in?
Of course, yeah. So my name's Harrison Ward, also known as Fell Foodie, perhaps better known as Fell Foodie. I'm an outdoor cook and hiker and mental health advocate and well-being speaker, I guess. All these multifacets to the business. Based here in the Lake District in Cumbria, in England, and generally, sort of working with a lot of sort of outdoor brands on that sort of front, and sharing my backstory from where I've sort of come from to find these hills and cooking as passions to go forward with. So again, I do a lot of work with various brands in the outdoor space on sort of maybe a content structure, as well as sort of a product demonstration angle, or the presentations, festival appearances and various bits there, as well as sharing more my personal battles with depression and various bits that we're going to go into with sort of more corporate backgrounds, I guess, and speaking of how I've discovered elements of the outdoors and certain managements to improve that and to manage my mental health going forward.
There we are. It's as if you've been practicing your elevator pitch for potential partners.
No, always ad hoc, always ad hoc. I like to run these things quite naturally.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, that's the best way to do it. But I think where would be great from a context point of view, because obviously I know your story, we know each other rather well, and understanding the evolution you've gone through from a pivotal point in your life in 2016 onwards, same year as mine, in fact.
It was, yeah.
What was the key details of your upbringing, the sort of things that made you the person you were before you got into the hospitality trade, before you ended up at York? Do you want to just run us through the sort of early stages, as it were, the exposition of Harrison?
Of course. The beginning. So very much. I mean, I wouldn't say I had an abnormal sort of childhood growing up. As I mentioned, I'm from Cumbria. I'm sort of born and bred in this area, originally a bit further north than where I'm based now, just outside Carlisle, but still quite a rural upbringing on that sort of front. I always been sort of quite a happy childhood again, sort of single mother, sort of who was a nurse, looking after me and my sister in the household, but good house, always had sort of food on the table, quite close to good school, various bits, so can have nothing really to complain there. Looking back on what was happy times, but again quite absent-minded back then, as you are with being a child. I mean, those sort of external thoughts to come then, but really sort of hitting puberty, all of a sudden noticed this complete wave coming over me, I guess, of quite self-loathing, insecurities, a lot of activities that perhaps I enjoyed before with no sort of care in the world, that all of a sudden became things that I wasn't sure if I wanted to do anymore, and was always quite hesitant for, and always been quite an outgoing individual. I was looking to have a lot of sort of friends at school and various bits, but was literally coming home to a completely different mindset and almost a doppelganger really in how I felt back at home. But this was something I just sort of didn't really understand at the time. Again, I was only young. It just first came over. There wasn't really a lot of resources at the hand. Again, sort of, I know we're sort of quite a similar age group as well in terms of the internet was becoming more of a resource in times, but we certainly didn't have the sort of information to hand in sort of the mobile phone sort of world as we do now, for example. And it was very much something that, again, I just sort of battled through, didn't really come to terms with what I was experiencing or what it was, didn't seek any help. not wanting to be a burden on anybody, friends, family, anything that sort of way. So battled through on these elements really, and just carried through sort of school, and again getting jobs in hospitality at the time. I was always known as sort of quite hard working at that sort of element. Picked up sort of job from quite a young age, about 13, in sort of hospitality trade, initially sort of back a house, and lots of sort of pot washing elements there, waiting on tables, various bits. And this sort of escalated into becoming something that was always sort of ran alongside my sort of studies at the time. So I stayed on sort of sixth form in school, and then was looking to go to university in York, and quickly found myself in that hospitality trade once again. So it was really at this point that, again, I was still going through these sort of quite destructive thoughts personally, and really discovered alcohol at this point. Really, it was a case of that it's quite a key component, I guess, in the hospitality trade and various bits in that sort of social activity. But likewise, in working in those trades, I'm sure there'll be people that have worked in those environments before, that your sort of relaxation, your sort of breakdown point at the end of the shift is generally just sort of gathering afterwards and pouring a drink and sitting and talking over your day. And initially that was something that gave me quite a lot of escape from the darker thoughts I had internally, and sort of sedated my mind to a degree, and allowed me to become more that absent-minded child again that I was before, without these sort of external cruxes that had really brought me down a chunk.
So when did the alcohol begin to become something you acknowledged as a problem rather than a part of the job, a minor coping mechanism? Was there a moment that you, well, I'm assuming retrospectively this is something you reflect upon, but when would you highlight things got worse?
Certainly, it's yeah, of course. At the time, it was something that I never really saw or understood at that particular moment. But quite quickly, I discovered a liking for alcohol, as many do. And again, I do appreciate it's quite a rite of passage in this sort of country. It's almost ingrained in the culture to a degree, especially at sort of 18, heading out various parties, heading to university, freshers' weeks and a lot. It's just something that's there in British culture. So initially, I didn't really see much of an issue to it. Something I very much enjoyed. And again, as I mentioned, it almost had that medicinal aspect from me, where it just shut off that darkness for me, and that sort of, again, Dutch courage, if you will, again, any sort of nerves and insecurities that might have been on the side. And quite quickly, this became something that began to escalate for me. So initially, I guess it was maybe 3 or 4 pints after work, and that's probably all I could stomach, stumbling home, back up the road and back into the house I resided in at the time. By the time I went to university at 19, I was regularly sort of consuming in excess of sort of 10 pints daily by this point. Again, tolerance had built by quite a degree, and as tolerance built, it took me further and further to reach that point of euphoria and escape, if you will. So at the time, it was seen as nothing other than tolerance. It wasn't seen as what was to become. But by the time I went to York again, I was quite a hardened drinker by that point, even at that sort of quite young age, and quite enjoyed that aspect as well. I was in the pub trade mainly, so I wasn't in sort of bars and clubs. I enjoyed sort of the interaction I had with various other individuals in that environment, seeing where their sort of lives had come from, generally an older sort of clientele as well. Well, when I went to sort of the university aspect, it was quite quickly into that sort of club scene, sort of parties at home, various bits, which didn't really confide in me more. I quite liked that sort of social aspect, and that was always the guise that I had the illusion of, I guess, of going out drinking. Was always, I'm just being social, I'm just talking to people, sort of thing. Quite quickly found myself back in the hospitality trade again, in a pub sort of in York, that sort of way, and really this is where it really started to escalate by this point. So again, was already quite a heavy drinker at this point, but really not seeing the reasons behind why I was particularly using this as a substance. And initially it felt very medicinal, as I mentioned, but quite quickly it was to become my poison on this sort of front, as tolerance continued to increase, continued to build. And by the time sort of I'd been in York, maybe sort of six to 9 months, I was at this point sort of consuming sort of in excess of 20 pints daily. I'd ballooned sort of in weight to over 22 stone, about 7 stone I put on since moving there. I'd taken up smoking full time by this point as well. And it was really at this point that now it was my sole focus. It was something that very much I was occasionally waking up in the morning. I'd literally be sort of brushing my teeth, sort of again having a drink at the same time, heading to work, filling a coffee cup up. And literally for the next maybe 19 months, 6 years onwards, not having a day's break at all from consumption. And again, at this point, again, I'm in that trade, so very much kid in a sweet shop. I'm working full time in that industry, and as soon as I'm outside that trade, I'm either at the other side of the bar or I'm in town, various other avenues. But externally, it didn't appear anything other than someone that sort of enjoyed a drink and enjoyed the social. I had lots of different pockets I sort of hung around with, and this wasn't again calculated. It was just the sort of way it went. I had my tolerance, my quota I wanted to make each day to really achieve that ultimate sedation of my mind that really at this point now was blackout, was complete oblivion. And at this point I'm battling sort of much darker thoughts than perhaps I did sort of growing up. So not wanting to be here at all, a lot of contemplation of suicide, and just really not wanting to exist or put any of my darkness or sadness onto anybody else to any degree. So for me it was just a way of just existing and continuing through each day with minimal impact on other people.
Were you analytical with your consumption to the point where you knew there was a certain amount of booze each day that would help alleviate the sadness? Were you almost dosaging your medication, or was it just a conscious, if I keep drinking things will be okay mindset?
An interesting one. I've not had that sort of angle before, but I guess I was always conscious myself in terms of what I suppose I could take in. For example, I knew sort of what my limits were to a degree, but occasionally with alcohol there's always elements that sometimes it maybe sneak up on you by surprise. I'm sure we've all had that in a social setting too sometimes, where you maybe just have a couple of drinks and all of a sudden you're whoa, where's this taking me? I'm lightheaded already. But certainly I knew, because I was such a heavy consumer of booze at the time, there was occasions where I certainly felt on the back of a particularly heavy session the day before, my tolerance was almost even further increased the next day. So I knew I was having a particularly big night out with friends or peers, perhaps meeting up with some old friends from school, or if it was there was some stag do's and parties going on at this point, that I would almost, I guess, pre-dose the previous day, so I knew I could go much longer the next day, which was again something that really is baffling looking back on the fact that I'm almost preloaded on alcohol to a degree to be able to take in so much more to my body. Just bizarre sensations, I guess. But really, for me at the time, there was always one aim. It was always one aim, was literally just complete shut off, flicking that switch in the head, getting to the point where you almost couldn't relay or appreciate where you were in life. So again, it was shut off. But I liked that sort of quite slow path into oblivion, to be fair. So again, things like drugs were never really my scene. Again, there was moments at this time where, of course, they came face to face in that sort of environment, as they do sort of on night outs and in the hospitality trade. But for me, that was a bit too 0 to 60 for me. It was almost blinked to no control. So I quite like that slow dark demise that I had with sort of alcohol drinking, and I was very much pints as well. I wasn't sort of spirits or wine sort of thing, just pints all day long. So a huge sort of volume of liquid as well, really, on that sense. But yeah, I clearly knew where I was in terms of where I wanted to hit most days, or where bits and what my tolerance was as a basic. But also, I think it was a case of, for me, that initial euphoric feeling I got from alcohol was quite easy to achieve to begin with. But as tolerance increased, that barrier pushed up and up further. But as doing so, each day I was starting a lot lower in myself. So my ground zero, if you like, was always lower again the next day. Exactly. So it almost became, when I was, I guess, drinking sort of in the mornings and stuff at work, again in that sort of trade, it was easy to sort of disguise and stuff, and it was literally just trying to get yourself back to a level state almost. It wasn't a case of I was still drunk by this point. It always felt as if it was just fully functioning. I always worked during this point as well, so even in these high consumptions I was always holding down a full-time job in various bits, but literally it was just bringing yourself back onto that level playing field, the level state, and then playing catch up. And some days I'd find that even that whole day would be just a catch up day. You would never get to that point of chasing that sort of that high, that euphoric feel from alcohol. It would just be a topping up sensation.
The calculated element to it does just show the inner workings of substance addiction, and as you said, the twisted parameter shift that goes from, if you start in the middle of the mountain, you're trying to get to the top, you're going to have to climb higher and higher each day because you start lower and lower. From a psychological point of view, it's no wonder that things started to spiral in terms of the suicidal thoughts and the depression. But from a non-psychologically qualified point of view, what's fascinating to me, and knowing the men in my life, my friends, family, etc., and the way that they interact with alcohol, the way that they interact with one another, the social interaction that they gain from it, it seems to me that it was almost as if you started craving the social interaction that came from the alcohol, but the alcohol then replaced the social interaction as the medium by which to get there. So the second that happens, you stop getting the thing that you were doing in the first place to reward yourself with, and then the substance abuse is what replaces it. So the switch very quickly flips to a very, very depressive and very damaging state of mind. And you were always conscious that the social element was something you enjoyed, weren't you? But was there a point where you realised you weren't even getting that from the consumption anymore?
I mean, as you put it there, I mean, I think knowing myself at the time, and I wasn't someone who drank at home at all. I was never really a home drinker, and even sort of at sort of family gatherings and various bits. Again, it just didn't have the same sort of impact for me. It was very much my escape from being at home, stuck in the blank four walls, just with my own conscious own thoughts, really. So that was certainly the big catalyst for heading out initially. That social guise. But as you mentioned, I'm sure that did fall by the wayside to some degree and became the excuse on it as well, really, to a degree. So I can look back now and see myself sort of heading out from the minute sort of the bars and the pubs opened, meeting a particular gang in that sort of time. And again, this was more sort of older gents and stuff at that point who again weren't working or weren't sort of in university and various bits. Meeting them for sort of their lunchtime sort of drinks, they'd head home, stumble out the pub at sort of 3-4 in the afternoon. I'd then move on to the afternoon gang. The guys coming on from work, they'd come in, they'd see me have a couple of drinks, they wouldn't think anything more of it. They'd then head home to cook their dinner, sort of 9-10 o'clock. I'd then meet the sort of the evening crowd, and before long I'm back in sort of the bars with the university crowd. So it was always different pockets that sort of found myself with, which is probably why from the outside the severity, I guess, and the element of how much I was actually consuming maybe wasn't seen by this point. But certainly, I can see how it replaced it for sure. Initially, as I say, it was that escape from my own sort of mindset, but as sort of things went on, as depression sort of brought alcohol into my life, it quite quickly they sort of became intertwined as two negatives bringing me further down. And again, the depressant aspect of alcohol, of course, just that downward spiral, really.
It's interesting because reflecting on my own relationship with alcohol, I very much use it as the social lubricant, the catalyst for occasion, etc. now, and I look forward to occasions that involve alcohol because of the social connection that comes from them, rather than the alcohol that I'm going to consume. So, excuse me, from my point of view, it's fascinating to hear that was something that was almost still a thread of DNA throughout your experience, because it showed that you were always still craving human connection. And as your depression got worse, as the suicidal thoughts got worse, I think the more that we reflect as a society now on what causes depression in the vast majority of individuals in the Western world, it is that distinct lack of human and social connection that feeds into that, allows it to get worse over time. So in short, it's no wonder that you allowed yourself to suffer as long as you did, because you still had that social element throughout it, which is twisted in a way, isn't it? Because you suffered with your mental health for longer because you also had an escape mechanism within it, but in turn it was also making your mental well-being worse off over time, which is a very slow form of torture almost to some degree.
Well, just as you're putting in that sort of front there as well, that sort of social aspect there, I mean, I suppose that really fits into the fact of when it continued for me and the levels I was consuming at this point, of course. I had quite a few friends come down to York for my 21st birthday at the time. Again, a particularly sort of drunken affair, sort of 6-day bender, all that sort of time, but which for me was quite, I suppose, at that point.
That was a Monday to Saturday, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I was well trained for this sort of thing. Again, I did put the work in, but it was, and literally again, all of a sudden, again, I was in this city really that again I had some peers that I'd met through the hospitality trade, through university. By this point, university had fell by the wayside for me. Literally, obviously, I was seeking. I needed that sort of monetary value to be able to keep my lifestyle up, and of course, work was provided. That university wasn't at the current time, so again, quite quickly that became more of a priority for me. Missing quite a lot of lectures and various bits as well. But when this sort of group came to York again, all of a sudden it was back to sort of my old sort of, I guess, peers and stuff from back home again that I'd built a strong relationship with, and really felt, again, absent-minded completely, not just with the alcohol at this point, but also just, again, the fact that I was in sort of that camaraderie once again, as you mentioned, that social, and just joking away, and again, forgetting really about any of the external pressures of the world once again. But one by one, these sort of friends started to go back home to various where they're living at the times, and quite quickly I just found myself very much alone in this city again. So as exactly as you mentioned, that social connection, although I was seeking that on a day-to-day basis, a lot of that was just particularly acquaintances or people with a similar lifestyle to me. And I joked at one point that all my friends were sort of people who worked behind bars or worked in takeaways. You know, that was that's what it was at the time. And I suppose you break it down in terms of what your lifestyle is, and really it's an interesting angle. But really for me, it was that particular moment there that I completely came to terms with how alone I was in this city, really. And walking home one night completely inebriated. I don't remember too much of the conversation as such, but I actually just sort of stumbled back and picked up a payphone at the time. Again, I didn't have a mobile or anything at the time. I didn't really have any connection with people, that sort of front, and I was quite an elusive character as well to a degree, and like to sort of not really have people interfering, if you will, in a way, the way I was just sort of going about my life. This was the way I was trying to remain present in life for them, but likewise not wanting too much interference. But literally I picked up this payphone at the time and called home at sort of the early hours of the morning, 3-4 in the morning, and literally just kept ringing. My mum was obviously in bed, wouldn't answer the call, and eventually she answered, and I just had one thing to say, and it was literally, I just wanted to say goodbye. I had no intention of carrying on living at this point. Again, I'd been battling this sort of depression from the minute I sort of hit puberty, really, and again contemplating leaving this mortal coil in all various aspects. Again, I'd be someone that would be, researching methods to try and get out. What was the least sort of pain for both myself and other people? What's the way you could just escape? And it really came to a point, really, at this sort of 21st moment, that that was it. I'd come as far as I could. I was now just existing. I really had no goals for myself. I had no real determination to get to the next day. It was very much just something that I was just gliding through it and literally just existing each day with this sort of sedation tactic. And it all just got too much. Again, I didn't want to be alone at this point in the city, and I had plans. Again, I lived quite close to the railway station in York, and just felt that I was just going to climb down one day and just try and get in front of one of the early morning trains. Really, it was just completely a case of not seeing any route out whatsoever of something that I've been battling now. And this is now 21, so what's that, sort of good 8 years now, really, of just sort of battling this sensation that I didn't really understand. And thankfully I didn't go through with this at the time. I was sort of talked around, and the one remaining friend that was still in York did actually end up driving me back to Cumbria that particular next day. And I did seek some sort of medical interaction at this point, and sort of went back to the family doctor, and who had records before, some of the things I've been going through depression-wise from maybe sort of 15, 16, but certainly didn't know the extent of where I'd gone to of now this self-medication process that I started using alcohol for. But yeah, all things were sort of explored at the time, I guess, of various bits of various counsellings and sort of medication and sort of weaning off and various bits, but I wasn't willing to make the change at this point at all. I felt as if my minimum impact I could have on people and other people, and to minimise that burden I felt I'd put on people, was to continue the way I was going. And I booked myself a train ticket, went back to York, and carried on this exact same lifestyle for another 4 years, just literally not wanting to be here, not wanting to exist, having no goals for the future, but just literally getting through each day with blackout drinking, really.
So that takes us through to 2016, roughly, doesn't it? Where the second but defining epiphany happens. I think it's fair to say, because you've had one. You've just described that moment where you realise things need to change. Yet we do what humans try and tend to do, and we revert back to the easier option or the comfortable option, and that's something that I did for a long time. When I was suffering with my depression, I always took the familiar option because it's what I'd grown used to, and that was less scary at a time when I was already very vulnerable. So doing things that terrify us when you're already terrified is a real challenge. So I can understand and empathise with why you went back to York, because the fear of change was probably actually more powerful than the fear of the situation that you were in. So the 4 years, I assume it was more of the same, nothing really different other than what you've described. And then what happened in 2016 that's ultimately started this journey that you're now on, the journey of self-reflection, sobriety, and cooking in the fells?
Yeah, absolutely, as you put it. Yeah, I think it was very much, it was still that escape at the time. I think it was the first time I'd actually revealed any issues I've been struggling from to anybody other than perhaps my dog at the time. I think I saw a post you recently put on about your dog sort of almost being the confidant in some of your battles.
He is French as well, the confidant.
Yeah. That was very much something for me as a child with that sort of thing. That was the only person who'd sort of reveal maybe the true feelings you were actually experiencing, which is, I know it sometimes can be bizarre to people from the outside who maybe don't appreciate that sort of bond with animals at sometimes, but this was the first time that really I'd revealed that again now to my mum, to one of my close friends, and to a medical practitioner. But that was it. It didn't go any further than that, and as I say, it continued on in York. And at some point during this period, I managed to meet a partner. Actually, at this point, again, as you mentioned, that social interaction side of things and that social company. Again, having sort of a loving partner was something I always did crave as well, and something that I always sort of seeked on. And again, probably put a lot of pressure on at one point as well, of thinking that would solve a lot of issues. And really, that was the only thing that was sort of there, which again is wrong too. I think, likewise, a lot of people mention have to be content with yourself before you head to that next sort of stage. But at the time, again, that was something that was very much a pinnacle point for me of reaching that sort of point. But yeah, I did sort of meet someone at this point. Again, the lifestyle I was leading at the time, I was very much in two relationships, both with this girl at the time and with alcohol. So the two didn't collide, the two didn't really cross over as such. I still worked very different hours with the hospitality trade, where she was more 9 to 5. So there was the chance really of weaving this sort of hidden life that I already had become quite an expert in into this now new relationship. So again, there was moments where I'd maybe have a day off in the week where she'd be back at work again, various bits in there. I knew I had a particular moment to have a particular skinful, to have that sort of recovery. So again, it was almost peaks and troughs by this point of where I could get in my fix, where I could get that quota in. But quite equally, again, when I used to pop round on an evening, over there, you've had a drink, haven't you? You'd be like, no, I've not had a drink. You have, or I've had 2. In reality, I'd had 12 to 15 pints, so very much I was someone that looked quite similar at the time. Again, a lot of people mentioned to me the fact that the only thing that sort of changed was a slight glazing of the eyes. I wasn't sort of an aggressive drunk or anything. I wasn't someone that was quite rowdy. I just generally became a more sedate character. There was even one particular bar that I frequented most days in town that really by the end I was surely a shareholder of. And it was one particular evening I came in the next day and said, oh, was I okay? I said, I really can't remember being in for how long was I? I hope I wasn't out of order. And I went, no, you're absolutely fine. Your eyes were closed for the last 2 hours, but you kept saying please and thank you, so we just kept serving you. And it was very much that sort of way. I was just this, I guess, drunken gent, if you will, just sort of going through my own particular fix. But yeah, so these two relationships again didn't really collide too much. There was obviously slight moments, sort of the tectonic plates, I guess, rubbing on each other to a degree, and certain things would cross over. And again, social parties and various bits, of course, that other lifestyle seeped in a little bit more and became more renowned. But generally, it was always okay. But there was elements where, again, she certainly didn't like that aspect for me, and alcohol really was the priority at this point. So any moments that became attempted moments of intervention, shall we say, which looking back I can see there were particular times like that, or any moments of pushing alcohol against maybe the two aspects. Alcohol always won, and it was always something that I pushed more towards. And this is really the level of sort of possessiveness it can get over you in sort of substance abuse, I guess, and really how it began to really change me as a person, change my sort of outlook, my priorities in things. And ultimately, me as a person, the person I believed I was, the character and the traits I felt I wanted to show to the world and various other people, were blinded. And it was eventually I was unfaithful to this partner, completely under the influence of alcohol, in sort of nothing more than sort of drunken sort of activities in sort of town, whilst in these sort of bars. But this was sort of discovered and really obviously brought an end to that relationship, rightly so. But also for me became the first particular time that I'd really come to terms with how far I'd fallen with alcohol, how much it controlled my day-to-day existence, and how much of a control it had over me as a person. And for the first time, really, I realised that this was no longer me. This had now compromised me as a person. I'd become someone I wasn't. And it was this point where I'd really come to terms with the fact I believed I was an alcoholic at this point. And initially, I guess, to try and win back this partner, I vowed to leave it all behind that day. So that was the 6th of June 2016, the year you've mentioned a few times there, and it was very much the time that, I guess, it's a difficult period looking back on it. I mean, I do talk about this quite a lot now, but I still can't get to terms with why I became that person, really. It was someone I deeply loved at the time, and I'd acted sort of completely out of character for, and caused great pain on someone, which again was never the aim for sort of my particular sedation tactics. It was always the opposite, of limiting that pain on others, really, and just keeping me going. But she was hugely selfless during this period. She made herself available for a long period of time, so I'll always remain very thankful for. But at this particular moment, I vowed to leave alcohol behind initially. I vowed to quit smoking, and really leave that whole lifestyle I'd grown into behind. On one particular occasion, I'd gone back to work the next day, and my boss had noticed something wasn't quite right with me, and literally just asked me the question again of, "You don't seem quite right. Are you okay?" And I just completely broke down in front of him at the bar there, just completely uncontrollably, in tears, inconsolable. And he said, "Just go sit outside, take a moment outside for yourself." And I popped outside. This was maybe 9 o'clock in the morning. I didn't come back in again. I was still sat out there to about 4 in the afternoon, just gazing sort of at nothingness. And a particular colleague came out of the pub to take over the shift at this point, pint in hand, and said, "Here you go, get this down you. This will make you feel better." And I just looked at him and said, "I don't drink anymore, John." And he said, "You are?" So I don't drink anymore. And this was someone that had seen me literally for the past sort of maybe 4 years at the end of the bar, being the equivalent of maybe a human vacuum cleaner when it came to sort of liquids and various bits, and would consume anything and anything at that sort of point. And overnight, that switch, I don't drink anymore, John. And I'd throw my cigarettes in the bin and literally vowed to become the opposite of this person I had become. And literally I knew I was this other character. But to get into that mindset and to get into that sort of that new life, I felt I could no longer live in this city that I was living in. Again, there was too much of a lifestyle I'd built. There was too many sort of contacts and acquaintances in that world that maybe wouldn't allow me to get to this new path. And I'd be lying if I didn't do a lot of this really to try and win back that partner at the time. It was very much me trying to redeem my actions, to try and win her back, to prove that what I was saying, my love for her at the time, wasn't just words. I could do this with actions. And to do so literally overnight, a city I'd been in 7 years, I left my job, I left my flat. Obviously I'd lost my girlfriend at the time, left alcohol behind, stopped smoking, and returned to Cumbria, where I'm originally from. Now at this point, again I mentioned I'd revealed, I guess, some of the issues I was suffering now to my mum, to that one particular close friend back on my 21st birthday, and to my family doctor, but nobody else. And at this point I typed in on my personal Facebook to everybody I sort of had on there exactly the reasons why I'd left York, why I'd gone, what I'd done, and just things I've been suffering from all those years previous. So I was completely open and transparent. Again, I suppose at a complete moment of low, the whole foundations had crumbled beneath me, where I didn't feel I could go any lower, and it just felt as if I've got to face my actions, I guess, and really put myself there and make myself accountable, even though really a lot of this was all personal destruction. But the support I received from that comment and from that in status of putting that on there was so powerful, and so really in awe of the sort of support and the sort of care that people wanted to provide to me, and was surely an instrumental step on those next few moments for me heading forward. I mean, there was people here that, looking back, I was still lucky to have in my life. Really, there was moments of intervention that, and ultimatums perhaps that my behaviour wasn't suitable, that they didn't want to be sort of friends anymore. Family, I suppose, could have been quite strained as well. I was seen as quite an unreliable character, someone that might make a scene at various places, and really feeling how lucky I was to still have these people rooting for me, really, and even not knowing what I was going through. Perhaps they had some indication, I don't know, but other than the alcohol side, the other stuff was very much kept very reclusive. So I'll always remain very, very appreciative and always in debt of that sort of support I received at that moment. And people initially started coming onto my doorstep at that point and encouraging me to basically take steps into the outdoors in various avenues. Again, I joined the gym again, got back on my bike, a lot of cycling. One particular friend even took me for a run, which at the time felt a step too far. But
I feel like it's the scene in Trainspotting with I can't remember his name, Sid or something, when he takes it when Ewan McGregor's taking up the hill and he's just hands on hips, thinking, nah, this isn't for me. But then again,
it's Arthur's Seat.
It is Arthur's Seat. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And he took me around the local town. I think it was only about sort of a 1.5 kilometre trip round there, but my God, did it feel like a marathon to me at the time. And again, obviously, I'm going through all sorts here. I've just come off alcohol. I've gone completely cold turkey, which again, possibly not the best course of action with the level of consumption that I was undertaking at the time. But for me, it was literally, I'm an all or nothing kind of character, and it was very much the sort of thing that life had gone from being somewhere that really I didn't want to be part of, to now having, I guess, a bit of a goal to myself as well, and a bit of a redemption moment that felt that that was my only sort of way through it. And again, sort of going through the throes of withdrawal there, obviously pining for cigarettes again, sort of heartbroken with the sort of relationship breaking down, a complete change of routine. I'm back at my mum's sort of thing after being away for sort of 7 years. It was just a complete, almost, what's the word, coming sort of back into its initial state, almost heading back into the hole you felt you'd come out of to a degree, but now completely open and transparent and vulnerable, really, to the external world. I mean, now all of a sudden I'm getting strangers sort of in the street who understand sort of what I've been hiding for so long, and not something I'd always push on people to be completely. I think it's a hugely important thing to talk about these things, certainly, and reach out for support with friends, family, or certainly medical practitioners, but wouldn't necessarily obviously advise to go completely open publicly like that sort of thing like I did. But for me at the time, it felt very much like the way I wanted to go about it, so I think that was a personal decision for that. But just began that sort of steps into that new lifestyle, if you will, and I was so willing to make that change and so determined to do this. I mean, again, I'm very overweight at this point too as well, so again I was pushing all those various elements, and I think I'd even given up sugar in my coffee at this point, so I was making things particularly hard for myself in terms of alcohol, cigarettes, pushing this new healthy lifestyle. And then one particular friend turned up at my doorstep and said he was going to take me for a hike, and at this point really I had no expectations of what to think this was. Again, I wasn't sure if it was going to be a little walk around the park or just sort of a woodland area. Again, although quite close to the Lake District growing up and sort of being from that area, it was something I very much neglected. I didn't really took them for granted. The closest I probably got was maybe sort of tea and cake in Keswick, really, sort of looking up at these mountains. So I just done what I had to hand. Again, I was quite penniless at this point. I mean, I'd racked up so many debts in York and various bits in terms of credit cards and bar tabs in various bits, and paying the last of my rent, which I was probably about 4 months overdue on, and obviously I think I received my last paycheck from where I worked, and that was docked to a degree because of various tabs I had for them. Plus, I think I'd just recently been on a managerial course that again was no longer to get any return from. So it was really I didn't really have anything to my name. And this one particular friend looked at me, and I think I donned an old pair of shorts, an old jumper I had to hand, and these are these scabby trainers with probably about as much grip as a pair of bowling shoes, I think. Took one look at me and said, "You can't go hiking like that." And on the way driving through to the Lake District, he pulled off at an outdoor store, picked a pair of boots off the shelf, planked them on the counter, and bought me these boots. And again, it was just such another huge show of support for me being completely at rock bottom here, not knowing which side to turn. Again, such a clouded mind and vision of not knowing where I was heading really, or what I was trying to do, or just trying to just put one foot in front of the other and make positive change, one day at a time, one step at a time. And having a moment like that really of encouragement and support was really humbling, really.
I can only imagine, and thank you very much for such a detailed narrative around the entire experience. There's so many things to unpack there that I'm not even really going to try and do it retrospectively, because there's just too many to cover. But I think the real thing that stood out for me there is the clean break effect that you had from a real macro point of view. That was what was necessary for you in that situation, but from a sort of more micro listener point of view, I think that sort of clean break, prohibiting access, removing yourself from access, removing yourself from the things that you've isolated as causing the problem, from a day-to-day point of view rather. What are the things that are making me unhappy? Can I remove the access to them from my day-to-day life? If the answer is yes, then the best course of action we can take is to do so. So from a food perspective, from a sort of health perspective, if you take away biscuits because you're having a pack a day that are in the house, don't have biscuits in the house, and then you've got to go through putting the keys in the car, getting in the car, putting your shoes on, going to the supermarket, and you ask yourself, do you really want the biscuits, or is it just some sort of negative habit that you've developed? So the best example of that desperate situation that you were in, to distill it really down, is it was a clean break from all the things that were having a negative impact on your life, which freed you up to actually find new things to explore, to enjoy. And it sounds like that friend that bought you the boots is the one that unlocked them.
Absolutely. I mean, it's again, it's important at this point to say that I was seeking medical help at this point as well. I'd become very clean, I guess, to friends and family. I'd put myself completely in that element of seeking support at this point. I was back to the family doctors and various bits again, seeking various counselling routes, that sort of way. Due to the sort of substance abuse, I wasn't able to get straight onto those sort of programs. Again, I had to have sort of 3 months break from alcohol before I was able to access those. But again, seeking a lot of substance abuse programs and various bits, sort of group meetings and various things that I was very open to at the time. So important to stress that as well, that it wasn't all just completely me and the support network that I had close to me. But yeah, very much so. For me, it felt that was the way to do it, was to get out of that familiar environment, if you will, and try to make a break away from that. And also, I guess by being so public, I guess I made myself very accountable as well, in terms of that sort of thing, where I was always been hiding these things internally. And you see it something quite a lot now, where people might post it on their particular social media, various bits, and they fancy a challenge or a resolution, and they'll post it out there and manifest what they're going to do for the next year. And I guess it is almost that element of, I suppose people will see a failure if you don't get to that point. But likewise, it's important, I think, to make those little steps forward to try and have that positive change. But this was it. So that particular chap bought these boots, carted me off to the Lake District, and then literally plonked me at the bottom of Blencathra, so one of the higher mountains in the Lake District, and that was it. Faced me with a large uphill struggle that again I'd been facing for many a year. I suppose.
You've been training, yeah.
Absolutely, and all of a sudden, ploughing up this hillside. So again, I mean, I don't remember much about the actual particular journey up there, other than just sort of blowing up my arse completely, really, and just sort of staring at my feet the whole way up, and little by little getting progress onto there, little stops. And again, as I mentioned, I mean, I'm not a figure of health at this point at all. I mean, it's literally 2 weeks on from leaving that life behind, that complete right turn from where I was heading before, and from people looking externally at this sort of change going on, it must be such a bizarre period where literally I'd almost peeled myself off that sort of bar which I'd been glued to for 7 years, and within literally an overnight change, I'm embracing all these bits. I was out cycling in my local area in the woodlands, but to running this way, to hiking up this Blencathra, and reaching the summit, not really even having a particular moment of getting any pat on the back or anything from my friend. He just sort of turned to me and said, "Right, we're doing Helvellyn next week." And I don't remember any other conversation with the heading down, but literally a week seemed to pass by. Again, I continued sort of the gym work in the week and various bits, and all of a sudden here we are again at the base of Helvellyn, now the third highest mountain in England, and classified as a Munro in terms of obviously for you over the border, and sort of heading up this really steep side from Firlmere, what just felt like a bit of a staircase up to the top. And as I mentioned there, this sort of uphill struggle of facing one step at a time felt like a huge sort of physical manifestation really of what I was going through personally, just putting one foot in the other, not really knowing the ultimate direction, just obviously full of various pains and various bits. It was very difficult, but having that sort of have that blind faith and just pushing through and seeking that sort of internal power to just sort of push through and head up to this mountaintop. And really upon reaching that summit and being at the trig point and looking down below over Striding Edge and Red Tarn, and it was a phenomenal sort of blue sky day as well at the time, it really just clicked something in me and really just sort of felt like it was the beginning of a new addiction and sort of igniting this new passion. And the endorphin hit I received from that sort of, I guess, exercise, and as well that sort of feeling of achievement at reaching the top of this thing, which it very much is, sort of these walking up these mountaintops and getting to the top and setting a goal and achieving it, was something that was far greater than the experience and the highs that I received previously from the likes of alcohol. I mean, there was always the downside to come with that, and always the elements, I guess, of hangover or withdrawal. It was always, again, topping up the next day to try and get back to that sensation, where this didn't have that. It just had that sort of feeling of elation, that sort of feeling of goodness and just flowing through you. And that quite quickly started this new path that really became, the following week was Scarfell Pike, and then by the end of the year we'd been sort of down to Snowdonia, up Snowdon, up to Ben Nevis, climbed these. So within 6 months of this whole turnaround, I'd now done sort of 3 national peaks. That running I was doing initially around the Tarn had sort of become 1k, had become 2k, which had become 5k into 10. And now some of these mountains I was hiking, we were actually swapping the boots for trail trainers and running up the side of these mountains. And it was a completely absolute different lifestyle to what I was previously in. And looking externally, as I say, it must have been absolutely incomprehensible, sort of looking at what was going on. And for me too, to just remembering how much I struggled heading up some of these hillsides, to be in such a short space of time, to actually be sort of running up the side. I mean, it was just absolutely baffling. And one particular friend
It's an incredible thing to have heard about unfolding and then have seen unfold since we first connected, because it's not been a journey that's slowed down by any stretch, but I can only imagine the gratification that came from covering that distance and crossing that finish line in that space of time. I mean, from a physiological point of view, it's highly impressive. From a psychological point of view, the turnaround is absolutely incredible. So I tip my metaphorical again in this case hat to you. I do actually have a hat here, so I'll put it on and tip it to you. That wasn't just for that gag. I haven't been planning that all week, but it's very reassuring to hear from a human perspective that no matter how deep a hole we feel we're in, there is a way out of it, no matter how hard it might seem at the time. And we're both individuals that have sort of been in that situation, so I'd like to think saying that doesn't sound trite to those that might be suffering, because I'm always very hesitant to try and simplify things, because I know how utterly ridiculous simplification sounds when you're the one that's suffering. But you are a shining example of how much things can change in such a short space of time by providing the structures to do so and having access to the support network, and obviously very lucky to have a friend that was so supportive, so fantastic in helping you run through that. But the real crux of it, the real initial turning point, like myself, was acknowledging it internally to yourself, outwardly to a dog. But it doesn't need to be a dog. It can be a journal, it can be a mirror, it can be another human being, it can be a voicemail to yourself if you're under the age of 21, maybe it can be a Snapchat to yourself, I don't know. It's the catalyst for progress in my mind for those that are suffering from a human rather than a chemical depression is that outward projection of internal acknowledgement. And it seems that for us both, that's started a journey that's almost allowed us to reclaim ourselves, which is something that I'm very grateful for, and I can only imagine you are. So it's it's just very, very inspiring and very encouraging to hear how quickly and how impressively you've turned your life around. So congratulations, you must be very pleased, I can imagine, at this point.
No, thank you, sir. It's very much something that I don't forget those times at all, really. I mean, it's quite a vivid memory as such, and something obviously now I'm lucky to also be able to share that story further to other people, and perhaps try to again provide that maybe hope as well to a degree of some bits. But certainly as well for myself, it's something that's still a personal battle, something I still manage. I still think it's something I'm aware of, and now know these more positive vices I have in place can really aid that sort of structure that I need in my sort of life, I guess, to really be the person that I know I am, and really the person I want to become.
Exactly. And there's two elements to this question, one of which I'm going to stick with the more positive side of things, because we've moved from the dark days, but the second is almost the caveat to that, which is something that I've suffered with myself in the past, having a very addictive personality, is replacing one addiction with another. So the first part of this is, can you just explain to us how the cooking, the food, the outdoor niche that you've carved for yourself became a part of this love for the fells, love for the outdoors? And then secondly, I know you've recently spoken about how actually food became a bit of a vice and an addiction for you yourself. Was that something that was there throughout the process of starting to cook outdoors, or was it something that developed throughout the journey? And how do you then reflect on replacing one vice with another, whether it is deemed outwardly healthy or otherwise?
So for me, food's always been a huge passion, especially cooking. I think from a very young age, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother growing up. I was the oldest of all sort of cousins in the family, so I was very much someone that had that quite one-to-one bond with the next generation, with the previous generation, for quite a long period. And she was a very keen cook, someone that would always put you to work as well. You weren't someone that would be able to just sit on the table these days and just expect it to be pushed in front of you. You were earning your keep as such in that sort of way. So, but I love sort of getting in that sort of interaction and learning from another, and also the fact that perhaps on sort of occasions where the family all came round, or maybe a Sunday, for example, how it brought everyone together around that table. And again, that social aspect we were talking about before, where food really seemed to bring people together, and how people were sharing stories of their day and coming together and really, once again, becoming part of something. And that's something that's always really held to me. And likewise, I was someone that would adore watching, I guess, cooking programs on the television, sort of researching through cookbooks rather than reading sort of, I guess, fictional stories and things like you maybe did at that age. And again, just exploring these new cultures as well through food and ingredients, and seeing where different parts came from, and really that one common human aspect that was food bringing people together, ultimately for sustenance, but also for well-being. It's always been something that's stuck with me, and I guess there was the lost years for a while that maybe food did take a path back from that sort of thing, where very much it was something that was just sometimes not even a priority as well. I'd be skipping food just to have more money to fuel the other sort of vice, really. But certainly it was much more of a convenience factor there, I think, where I was consuming a lot of I suppose high calorific foods and various bits in there, very quick foods, but always had that passion behind the scene. And likewise with the alcohol side, I guess, to be fair, it was very much the two. As much as I consider myself a bit of a connoisseur of various culinary aspects, and with alcohol, I appreciated the craft that went into various lot of these products. And it is important to say I'm not anti-alcohol these days. It's just it doesn't have a part in my life personally. Each to their own. It's very much something that my mum always asks if you can have a glass of wine when I'm with her, and I say, well, can I have a chocolate bar? It's very much it's very much a personal decision. But for me, it was I very much appreciated the craft that went into it. But likewise, I could quite quickly just consume whatever was put in front of me too. So both on food and alcohol during those particular dark days, there was the level I'd like to have had and taken in, but also the opportunist aspect to that. But that's really been food through a way, and certainly it has been a vice through that point as well. I think I have that all or nothing nature, as you mentioned. Again, you mentioned biscuits is often something I often joke with, the fact that that addictive personality does transfer itself away to many aspects.
That wasn't a direct attack, to clarify. It was just a generalised, biscuits are a vice that most of Great Britain deals with, I think. As long as it goes with a cup of tea, to play a stereotype, just to save myself.
Absolutely. No. Chocolate hobnobs were doing a very personal attack, but it was okay. So it was but it was, for sure, it's something that I have battled with my weight over the years, even before the alcohol side of things. I carried a bit of weight at school, for example. Got a bit fitter before university, and then again lost that coming out the side. But more recently, for sure, I think with the vices I'd replaced it with, and I guess those new addictions which had perhaps been sort of like some fitness and hiking for sure. More positive outlooks, healthy eating. Again, I'm someone that I enjoy the process of cooking as well. I think it's quite a mindful experience, spending the time there to create something, and knowing that you've created that dish is in front of you. And likewise, again, getting a lot of sort of fresh organic produce in there too, which again, I think, when you are perhaps fueling a vehicle, for example, you wouldn't expect it to go very far if you were putting sort of bad products inside it. So I think that's very important with food too, which I think that does transfer into both physical and mental. What we consume. So it was very much an outlook that I think I did fall back on during the lockdown periods, for example, where all of a sudden the gyms had all shut. We weren't really allowed to, felt like we weren't allowed to go outside, and even me living right in the heart of the Lake District here, there was almost just like it felt like almost a xenophobic approach from sort of neighbours and things, where you were just looked upon as if you were an outsider. You weren't here, if you were suddenly donned in hiking gear, you were a tourist, and you shouldn't be out, and people were keeping tracks of where you were. And it very much brought me into a position where I felt I couldn't go out, and so I didn't want to have that negative impact from going about my business, which really I suppose I probably should have prioritised. And likewise, I struggled to get into the home workout sort of setting. As I mentioned with the alcohol side, I've liked to always differentiate those paths a bit, really, and head to a location to do, I suppose, the activities I want to do, whereas really it's all escapism from being stuck by myself indoors. So I struggle with that transition, and really I did fall back on food, I think, and that's something that I think the other scales have certainly shown that too. But it's something that I know that was particularly my coping mechanism at the time for a very unusual period in society, that I just tried to beat myself up too much about that. I think that was my crux. There was moments where I was craving alcohol once again. Thankfully I didn't fall back on that, But that was always one of the bits I really enjoyed most about that. The fact you could just escape a bit, and time would go a lot quicker. During a point like lockdown, it felt that we were in a very slow, unusual period that for some who were maybe by themselves or without sort of that support network, it would have been a very difficult period. But food generally, has been a constant in the life now, and something that that passion for food was something that I quite quickly took with me into this new passion for the mountains. So it's something that very much that I initially began by taking sort of packed lunches, quite extravagant packed lunches out with me into the fells. Something that I'd packed the night
Picnics,
before,
as they're better
walk
known.
up there. Yeah, exactly. And get a lot of comments from people who have maybe the soggy cling film butties that have been squashed in the bag. When I was whacking out sort of a risotto I'd made the night before, or a nice sort of stew in various bits. And someone suggested to me, why don't I get a stove and actually start cooking these meals from scratch in these environments? And not one to shirk a challenge. That's exactly what I did. I bought a stove, packed my pack, and took it up onto the hillside and took my kitchen into the outdoors. And now was taking in that view below that I'd really sung to me those years before.
What was meal number one?
So meal number one was fairly simple. I thought I tried it really. It was me trying to get used to the equipment I was using, for example, and seeing what I could transfer. So I did a bacon poached egg muffin with a sort of a caramelised red onion jam that I made all from scratch at the time as well on the side.
Very nice and simple for outdoor cooking. You modest man. You won't catch me making caramelised red onion jam anytime soon indoors, let alone outdoors.
Bless you. Well, for me it was. I appreciate the first world nature of that one. It's for me, I suppose it was poaching an egg, which was a different skill set for that sort of degree. I mean, we can all fry bacon in a pan, I'm sure, or for those that don't consume those sort of products, a similar sort of item. And again, sort of the jam was more of a slow cook sort of way, that controlled in sort of the heat from the stove in sort of now the elements where you had sort of the wind at play in various bits and air temperature too. So for me, it was an initial first one to sort of see how feasible this was.
It's skill development as well, isn't it? Which is a fundamental part of, as you said, setting those goals, achieving them. Day one, that you battled the wind in a different way through cooking rather than through striding up Helvellyn as it was. That's another win. That's another point in Harrison's corner versus the previous version of himself.
100%, absolutely, yeah. And again, there was some elements of similarity, and again, I think ultimately the personality was still there inside. It was just clouded a bit by these vices and by these other ailments. But it was again, those initial steps where a lot of the things I do cook have always been stuff that I've maybe was more afraid of in the kitchen beforehand. So again, it was just transferring that skill set out and about, and also of course transferring that equipment wise too, in terms of what you've got with you, making sure I had everything there. There's obviously times where I have forgotten certain elements to those too, but that was my first initial dish that I took out into the hillside. But quite quickly again fell in love with that sort of practice of just slowing things down, which we live such busy lives sometimes, I think, where, and even with sort of mountaineering and hiking, it's always the aim is to get to the top, get that summit selfie with the tree point or the cairn, and head back down again to sort of back to our previous lifestyle and get on the sofa and get Netflix on. It's for me, it was just spending a bit of time in that location, setting my mat out. I like to take everything there in its rawest form too, to try and prep it from scratch. But very much appreciate that some people could just take little steps into this new aspects of outdoor cooking and perhaps take something that's a bit more pre-prepared. But for me, it's just spending that time taking in that view and really sort of getting back to nature, which I think is such a vital part of again being human, which I think sometimes we've left behind to a degree. It's certainly been somewhere that I felt very much at home, somewhere that I felt that has ticked boxes for me personally that nothing else has really hit, and there's always been false sort of sensations of that. And ultimately that dopamine fix, I think we all just want to be happy. I think that's where everything's come from me. We seek that happiness, and whatever format it is, whether it was alcohol initially was giving me that sort of false happiness for a while, whether it be food, which again has little bits of adrenaline seekers, there's obviously drugs and various bits, or again exercise and outdoor activity has provided that too in boatloads, but without that sort of negative come down. So that was my initial steps into the outdoors with food, and we've gone from there, and so-called dubbed the Fell Foodie. Obviously the Fells, as we call them here in the Lake District, and that love of food seemed like a less pretentious term for a gastronome, so I went for foodie.
I'd say probably wise. Fell gastronome doesn't quite have the same sellable qualities to it, I don't think. But the one element that rings true, well, everything you said there rings true to me personally, but One thing I'm interested in hearing from you is whether you feel any sense of spiritual fulfillment from the outdoors as well. Because I know for me, as a non-religious person who has studied and has a degree in theology and religion, I obviously look at these things with a critical eye, and I reflect on my own perception of spirituality, and I often find I am most overwhelmed by the concept of spirituality when I am on my own in a vast expanse of hills where there is no other human being visible, and the insignificance of my existence suddenly starts to weigh very heavily on my shoulders. And I think that for me really helps calibrate me in this first world, this busy life that you've already referred to. So do you have any spiritual attachment to the outdoors as well as the things you've already mentioned?
Another great question. Yeah, it has been something that from moments in this sort of turnaround has come into play for me. It's always something I'm quite hesitant, I guess, to openly share so much. Again, I very much appreciate it's a very personal aspect to people. I've not been a religious person previously. Again, I probably wouldn't class myself as spiritual either, but there has been moments where it has certainly felt like there's perhaps been, I guess, a power bigger than yourself in a way, I guess, in these elements, and certainly in the outdoors, where it's that sort of rekindling to nature, that ancestral link maybe as well, that sort of primal activity, which again, even the cooking side, I find that's always brought me to that element, the fact that initially we cooked over fire in sort of these homesteads and various bits, and that became a key reason for sort of human progression and survival. And then over time, of course, we refined that in sort of more clay ovens to various sort of kitchen sets to all of a sudden international trade, which brings these ingredients and bits all around the world. And for me, it's now taking out those more refined dishes with international sort of heritage back into the outdoors, back into the elements, back into that sort of primal roots has always been one of the key attractions for it to me. But certainly, yeah, in terms of I did journal quite a lot in my first sort of year sober. My first year into this aspect, I've not read them back yet actually, but it's something that I journaled every day on that sort of front. And there was moments that I very much felt that there was something really pushing through at times. But during this point, I guess I had all sorts of moments where I guess there was even elements where I do look back and I had a bit of a god complex at one point, I think, which was more when I was using some medication to help me as well in certain bits. And I think all of a sudden it felt like everything was going my way and it was all for me and my name was in lights and things were just working out perfectly. And so there's all different aspects, but there's certainly one that comes to mind was when I was actually running through the Greenburn Valley outside Grasmere in the Lake District, running at night with my head torch on in the hills. Once I got into that sort of activity, and I was out there, and I think again I quite like music on when I'm sort of running. I know you're a bit different to that sort of thing and like to sort of be more in tune with your own body, but for me I quite a lot of I think it was actually the Last of the Mohicans soundtrack it was on at this particular time. In the hills, I'm out there in nature, just sort of again finding my feet little bits, again quite quick reactions in the dark, sort of completely to myself, completely clear sky of stars as well, no light pollution at all in that valley, just me in this valley as well at night time. And all of a sudden a family of deer came alongside me and were just literally running alongside me in this valley for a good sort of 5 to 10 minutes, just completely like we were just in tune with each other, no sort of sense of threat for both myself or for them. And again, this sort of journey I was going through at the time, this complete redemption journey I was going through, and really so open to change on all fronts and support, that a moment like that just felt as if it was certainly something that was perhaps much greater than myself. And yeah, it's something that always sticks by me as quite a special moment really. But again, to those that maybe don't believe certain aspects of that, I can also see it could be completely coincidental too, which is more all that aspect too. But at the time it certainly felt as if it was me connecting to nature on a higher plane.
I'm quite jealous. That must have been quite a nice experience all in. But finally, first of all, thank you again for sharing everything in such detail. But I'm conscious that we're into a new phase of your existence now, an exciting one. So what is next for Harrison / Fell Foodie? Because I do feel like, as you've said, the interchangeability of those is quite stark, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a pseudonym that's now become, I suppose, a key part of me now. But it's,
you need to change your passport, I think.
Well, I've not got one of those blue ones yet. So I'm sort of holding on to the previous one. But anyway, we won't go into politics. But it's yeah, very much so. I think it's for me going forward now. I mean, I've embraced this new sort of lifestyle. Again, hiking that sort of way. I've shared a lot of my journeys online during this point, both sort of my sort of personal journey as well as this new journey into being more of an outdoor cook and embracing the outdoors. So that's something that's allowed me to gather a bit of sort of a loyal following in that front, which I'm humbled to have, and likewise has provided opportunities for me to work with some brands in the outdoors and various bits, and really share my journey further. I mean, I've been lucky to have quite a few media platforms, sort of magazines, various bits in there, and even some TV recently and stuff, and where for me it's just really trying to push that message across of that fact that it's okay to not be okay, for example, and that we can share this on, and really having that sort of problem share being a problem halved. And if I can use my story now to share and even inspire just one person, then it makes my struggles all the more worthwhile that I've been through in the past. So that's a huge part of my thing going forward. I'd love to do more sort of corporate talks in there. I've been looking to do some school talks, for example, as well, which have been hugely empowering, talking to that next generation, that I can picture myself being sat in that crowd when I was back then at 13, not knowing what I was going through, having no understanding, thinking I'm the only one in the world going through these issues, and hearing someone like-minded talk back has been quite a full circle experience, really. But also on the foodie aspect too, I mean, it's fantastic to have some demonstrations out there, take some groups out into the hills, show them why I love that aspect of cooking in the outdoors as a mindful experience, as a practice, as a hobby, all aspects to that. And again, showing what we can prepare as well on those equipments out in these remote locations, where so often people are using just the dehydrated meal packs out there in various bits, or meal deals from Tesco either up in the hills, and you really can have that fantastic sustenance while you're out there, which for me really elevates the experience. I've never been one to shirk from good food. I've never been one to enjoy the sort of fast food experience. So for me, once I got into hiking, it was never going to be something that I was going to cut corners for then either. So yeah, a practice I love and a practice I'm proud to be able to share.
Fantastic. And where can people find you in terms of main platforms?
Yep, so I'm on most of the major platforms, but Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, various bits, as Fell Foodie, all one word, Fell Foodie, and again, website online and various bits too. And please do, if you have any questions as well, please do feel free to reach out on those platforms. I'm always someone that has to reply to all various bits on there as well, and share anything further that I can do. But yeah, it'd be great to see you there.
Fantastic. Thank you again, mate, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure.